In this video, we're going to be talking about the cleanData method. So this method modifies the temperature's instance variable by removing all values that are less than the lower parameter and all values that are greater than the upper parameter. The order of the remaining values and temperatures must be maintained. And then it gives an example of some values that could be in the temperatures array list, and then what should remain in that array list after the cleanData method is called. So to start off, let's go ahead and write some pseudocode to sort of orient ourselves. We know that we have this array list of doubles called temperatures, and we want to be comparing each of the temperatures inside of this array list to both lower and upper to see if they can stay in the temperatures array list or they need to be removed. So there's this idea that we want to be looping over all the temperatures in the array list. Okay, it's also important to note here that we're not like creating a new array list and storing the values in that one. We're directly modifying this instance variable temperatures. So by the time cleanData is called, temperatures, if it has any temperatures that are lower than the lower bound or higher than the upper bound, will be changed. So it will not be the same as it was. Okay, so but first we're going to loop over all the temperatures in the array list, and then we want to grab a temperature at a specific index, grab the current temperature, and then we check if it is 1 less than the lower bound or 2 greater than the upper bound. If it satisfies either one of these conditions, then we know that we need to remove it from our array list. So if it is either, remove it from the array list. And that should be it for our pseudocode, right? We're not returning anything because this is, the return type is void. We're just modifying this temperature array list. So we can go ahead and start implementing it. So looping over all the temperatures in the array list. So this sounds like it's going to be a for loop. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than temperatures dot. So remember, with arrays, you're going to be using that dot length. But since this is an array list, we want to use the dot size method. If you can't remember, this information is on the Java cheat sheet. So make sure to grab a look at that. Okay, and then we want to look at every single value inside that array list, so we do I++. So then we want to grab the current temperature. So the temperature at the current index we're looking at, and we're using I to keep track of that index. So we know that it's going to be a double because that's the values that are inside of temperatures. So double, lowercase double. We just use the uppercase double because we need to pass in an object for an array list. But so double current temp is equal to temperatures dot get at I, another array list method. Okay, so what do we want to do with that current temp? We want to compare it. So if current temp is less than the lower bound, what's the lower bound? Is this parameter that's being passed in. If it's less than the lower bound, or if it's greater than the upper bound, also another parameter that's being passed in, then what do we want to do? We want to remove it from the array list. Okay, so what does that look like? So what we're going to do is temperatures dot remove, and what do we want to pass into that method? We want to pass in the index of the element that we want to remove. So that's going to be the current element. And you might think that you're done with the code, right? I wrote out all the pseudocode, I implemented the pseudocode, I should be done here. But okay, so I loaded in the code that we wrote into a Java playground. And if you use the example that's in the problem, where we have these 10 temperatures, and we go ahead and we run cleanData on it, and after that we should have only these 7 temperatures left, you actually won't really notice the bug that this code has with the sample data that the College Board has given you. They're a little bit tricky about this, okay? Because if you run this code, you're going to get exactly what the problem wants you to have, which is that you have these 7 temperatures and you've removed anything that's lower than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound. However, let's say, for example, you put 2 temperatures in a row that should be removed. So now we have 142.0 followed by 145.0. Our temperatures array list should look like this again, but when we run our code, what's going to happen? It looks like it didn't remove this 145.0 value from the array list. How come? Well, the reason has to do with this I that's keeping track of our indices. When we are on index 1, so we're looking at 142.0, we go ahead and we remove it from our array list. So then our array list is going to look like this. But on the next iteration of our loop, what's going to happen is we're going to increment our I to be 2. So now we've actually skipped over this 145.0 that is now at index 1, and we're moving on to this 85.0. So the little trick you have to add here is I minus minus, because then you're going to go back and you're going to check out whatever new value is in the index that the old value that we just removed now takes the place of. So if we add that I minus minus and we run it, we can see that 145.0 is now gone from our array list, and it looks like the way that it should. We have to include this I minus minus to make sure that we're checking every element in the array list. That should be all the code for our cleanData method. So let's go ahead and let's call it with the sample data that we're given. Here are the values that are in the temperatures array list for this sample WeatherData object. And then the values for lower and upper are 85.0. And for upper, it looks like it is 120.0. So we're trying to remove the values that are either lower than 85.0 or higher than 120. So we can go ahead and jump into our for loop. We're going to set I equals 0 and check whether that's less than temperatures.size. It looks like there's 10 elements in this array list, so 0 is less than 10, so we can go ahead and grab the first temperature. So that's going to be this 99.0, 99.1. So we need to check whether 99.1 is less than the lower bound, 85.0, or greater than the upper bound, so 99.1 if it's greater than 120.0. It doesn't satisfy either one of these conditions, so it looks like it is good to go. It can still stay in the array list. We increment our I, now it's 1, so now we're looking at this value, 142.0. We check whether it's less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound. It looks like it is greater than the upper bound, so unfortunately we are going to remove it from our array list. So now it no longer exists. And now to make sure that we actually look at the next element in our array list that has now moved into the index that the previous one that had been removed used to occupy, we're going to decrement our I. So we're going to go to 0. And then when we go to the next loop of our for loop, we're going to increment our I, and then also what's going to change here is our size. So we only have 9 elements inside of our array list because we just removed one. So now we want to compare our I to temperatures.size, which is now 9. So let's go ahead and grab the value at the first index. So that's 85.0. It is exactly the lower bound, but we are only looking for strictly less than, so it gets to stick around, it gets to stay in the array list. Moving on to the next element, this is 85.1. This, once again, does not satisfy either one of the conditions, so it gets to stay again. We increment our I, it's now 3. We grab the value at the third index, so that's at 84.6. Is 84.6 lower than the lower bound? Yes, it is. So we go ahead and remove it from our temperatures. Okay, so and we decrement our I, so now it's 2. When we go back to the next loop, we increment our I, it's now 3, but we also have to update our temperatures.size because now we only have 8 values in our array list. Okay, so now we look at the element in the third index, which is where 84.6 used to be, but now there's a new element that we need to look at. So that's 94.3. Is 94.3 less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound? No, it fails both those conditions. So what we do is we move on to the next element, which is this 124.9. Is 124.9 0.9 less than the lower bound? No, but it is greater than the upper bound, so we are going to remove it from our array list. And we're also going to decrement our I for this line here. Then once we loop back around again, we're going to increment our I to 4, and now our temperature.size has been dropped down to 7. We only have 7 elements in our array list. So now we're looking at the element at index 4, which is 98.0. We check whether it's less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound. It doesn't appear to satisfy either of those conditions, so it gets to stay. We move on to the next element in the array list, which is 101.0. Is 101.0 less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound? No, it is not. It gets to stay as well. Now we're on to, we increment our 6 again. We're on to the 6th and final element in the array list, which is 102.5. Is 102.5 less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound? No, it is not. So it also gets to stay. Then when we try to increment our I again, we get 7. 7 is not less than 7. So we are actually done modifying our temperatures array. So this is what our final temperatures array looks like, and it matches up exactly with what the problem statement said that it would look like. Okay. If you get rid of the pseudocode, here is what our cleanData method looks like, where we're looping over each of the temperatures inside of the temperatures array list. We are grabbing the temperature at that current index, comparing it to the lower bound, comparing it to the upper bound. If it's less than the lower bound or greater than the upper bound, we're going to remove it from the temperatures array list, and then we're going to decrement our I so that we take a look at the new element in that index. Hopefully this helps you out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I'll get back to you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.